"You are fired. Get out of my company now," ordered a millionaire to an elderly kitchen assistant. Days later, he was shocked to see her sitting in his place at the company. The sun had barely risen when Dorothy crossed the mirrored doors of the imposing building she knew so well. At 65, her body carried the marks of time, but her brown eyes still shone with the same dedication as 30 years ago when she began working as a coffee lady in that company. Small in stature, with grey hair always impeccably tied in a bun, she wore the navy blue uniform that Harold, the founder, had personally chosen because he considered it elegant and dignified, as everyone who works here deserves to be treated. As she walked down the main corridor toward the executive floor kitchen, she greeted each employee by name, knowing the life stories of almost everyone there. News of Harold's son's arrival to take control was already circulating through the corridors like a cold wind. "Good morning, Dorothy. Today's the day we meet the new boss, isn't it? They say he's quite different from his father," commented Steve, the security guard who had worked there for almost 20 years. "Yes, today's the big day. Harold always spoke of his son with such pride. I hope he inherited his father's heart and not just the family name," Dorothy replied, trying to hide the concern she had felt since learning about Harold's health problem. The executive floor kitchen was Dorothy's domain. There, among imported porcelain cups and sophisticated coffee machines, she had served countless meetings that shaped the company's destiny. She knew each director's preferences, who liked strong coffee, who preferred it with a touch of cinnamon, who always asked for a slice of cake to go with it. Harold used to say that Dorothy knew more about the executives than the entire human resources department. That morning, she prepared everything with special care. The new president's introduction meeting would be at 9 o'clock, and she wanted to impress Michael, to show that the respect his father dedicated to her wasn't in vain. With meticulous movements, she arranged the silver tray with the best china, prepared freshly ground coffee, and organized small typical sweets she knew were the favorites of the most senior directors. "They say he closed 3 companies in the last year and fired hundreds of people. How will he look at an old lady like me?" she murmured to herself while checking if everything was perfect. "Harold, my friend, I hope you recover soon. This company is your legacy, your entire life." The buzz in the corridor announced Michael's arrival before he even appeared. Unlike his father, who always arrived greeting everyone with broad smiles and questions about family, the new president emerged like a storm. Tall, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, he had the same eyes as his father, but without the warmth. At 40, Michael had already built a reputation in the corporate world, relentless, efficient, and completely focused on numbers. He ignored the employees watching him and went directly to the meeting room, where the executives were already waiting. Dorothy observed the scene from the kitchen door, feeling a tightness in her chest. She adjusted her uniform, picked up the tray prepared with such care, and headed to the room as she had done thousands of times before. "Excuse me, I'm just coming in to serve coffee," she said politely as she opened the door. "Welcome, Mr. Michael. I'm Dorothy. I've worked with your father for 30 years. "I don't recall asking for introductions or interruptions," he replied dryly, without even looking at her. "This meeting is crucial, and we're on a tight schedule. Leave that there and get out." The luxurious office, with its huge glass windows and panoramic view of the city, seemed even more imposing that day. The long, solid wood conference table seated 12 executives, all visibly tense with the change of command. Documents were scattered everywhere, spreadsheets, graphs, performance reports. Michael had demanded access to all figures from the last 5 years, and the atmosphere was one of expectation and fear. Dorothy tried to maintain her composure as she served the coffee, starting with the most senior directors, as she always did. She could feel Michael's impatient gaze burning into her back. Her hands, which already showed signs of age and mild arthritis, trembled slightly as she served each cup. When she finally reached the head of the table, where Michael had taken the place that for decades had belonged to Harold, the trembling increased. "Please be brief. We have a lot of work ahead," he said without looking at her, while leafing through documents. "From today, many things will change in this company. My father may have been complacent, but I am not. Your father is a wise and just man, sir. He built this company by treating people with dignity." Dorothy couldn't contain her comment while placing the coffee cup beside him. The silence in the room was oppressive as Dorothy tried to serve Michael, The stack of documents in front of him looked like an insurmountable mountain, and the new president gestured impatiently as she approached with the cup. It was at that moment that the inevitable happened. Perhaps due to nervousness, perhaps due to the natural tremor of her aged hands, perhaps a whim of fate. The tray tilted a few degrees beyond the acceptable. The coffee, dark and steaming, spilled like a wave across the table, soaking documents, staining meticulously prepared charts, and hitting the sleeve of Michael's impeccable suit. Time seemed to freeze. The executives collectively held their breath. Dorothy stood paralyzed, the tray still in her hands, watching the disaster unfold without being able to do anything to stop it. For heaven's sake! "Look what you've done!" Michael exploded, rising abruptly, his suit stained and important papers ruined. "This is unacceptable. How can you be so incompetent?" "Forgive me, sir. It was an accident. I can clean it. I can fix it." Dorothy desperately tried to repair the damage, grabbing napkins and trying to save the documents. "Please give me a chance." The fury on Michael's face was palpable. His eyes, so similar to his father's but so different in expression, were fixed on Dorothy as if she were a criminal. The luxurious office, with its expensive furniture and artwork on the walls, suddenly seemed too small to contain his anger. As the executives watched in silence, unable or too fearful to intervene, Michael began gathering the soaked papers with abrupt movements. Drops of coffee dripped onto the polished wooden table, marking like dark tears what seemed to be the end of an era. Dorothy, still trying to help, offered napkins she took from her uniform pocket, her hands now trembling uncontrollably. Humiliation burned on her face like fire, as decades of dedicated service seemed to evaporate in that instant. "I'm very sorry, Mr. Michael. It never happened before, in 30 years of service. Your father always said that we all make mistakes," she began, her voice as shaky as her hands. "My father is no longer in charge. I am, and this is unacceptable," he shouted, throwing the wet papers on the table. "You're fired. Get out of my company now." Dorothy's world collapsed with those words. 30 years of dedication, of arriving before dawn and leaving after everyone had gone, of knowing every detail of that company and caring for everything as if it were her own home. All of it swept away by a seconds-long accident. She felt her legs weaken and had to lean on the table to avoid falling. She looked around at the faces of executives she had known for so long, seeking some support, some defense, but found only lowered gazes and embarrassed expressions. No one dared challenge the new president on his first day. No one would risk their own job to defend an elderly server, no matter how beloved she was. "Please, sir, it was an accident. I'm 65, I won't easily find another job," Dorothy pleaded, dignity fighting against despair in her voice. "My granddaughter is sick. She needs expensive medication. Your father knows my situation. He always helped me." "That's not my problem," Michael cut her off, adjusting his stained sleeve with a napkin. "If you can no longer do your job properly, that's exactly why you should have been replaced long ago. Efficiency is what matters now. Collect your belongings and leave before I call security." With what little dignity she could gather, Dorothy placed the tray on the table, straightened her shoulders and looked one last time at that room where she had served for decades. The walls witnessed so many stories, the paintings she had seen being hung, the view of the city that had changed over the years, while she remained constant and dedicated. Silent tears ran down her wrinkled face as she slowly walked to the door. No farewell words, no thanks for the years of service, just the heavy silence of an era ending in the worst possible way. "Harold would never treat me like this," she murmured quietly, more to herself than to others. "He always said that a company is made of people, not papers and numbers." The path to the kitchen, where she kept her few belongings, never seemed so long. Employees who saw her pass by with tears in her eyes and head lowered immediately understood what had happened. Fear spread like wildfire. If not even Dorothy, with 30 years in the house and beloved by the founder, was safe, who would be? She collected her worn purse, a photo of her granddaughter, a small notebook where she wrote down each executive's preferences, and left through the back door as if wanting to hide her shame from the world. The security guard at the gate, who had seen her come in every day for decades, didn't know what to say when he saw her leave like that, in the middle of the morning, with red eyes and uncertain steps. "Dorothy, what happened? Is everything okay?" he asked, concerned about the elderly woman's visible distress. "It's over, Steve. 30 years of dedication ended in an instant because my old hands spilled coffee on the new boss's papers," she replied, her voice choked with held-back tears. "How will I tell my granddaughter? How will I pay for her medicine now?" The journey to her humble home in the outskirts was a blur of pain and worry. Dorothy barely noticed the familiar streets, the neighbors who greeted her, the small market where she bought food whenever she received her salary. Her mind was stuck in that meeting room, in Michael's hard stare, in the cruel words that still echoed in her ears. "You're fired. Get out of my company now. Out of my—" Like a relentless verdict, a sentence not just for her but for her sick granddaughter, who depended on her care and the money she earned to buy the necessary medications. Upon arriving home, a simple two-bedroom construction she had managed to buy with many years of savings, Dorothy felt the weight of an entire life collapsing on her tired shoulders. How could I be so careless? So many years without ever making such a mistake. Why today? Why with him? She lamented, as she carefully folded her uniform and put it away in the closet. "Harold, my friend, what will become of me now?" With slow and heavy steps, Dorothy headed to the small cabinet in the bathroom where she kept her granddaughter's medications. She opened the door with apprehension, already knowing what she would find but still shocked by the sight. Only empty packages without the essential medicines that should have been purchased with the salary she would receive next week. Salary that would no longer come. Holding the framed photograph of her granddaughter, a girl of just 10 years old with a radiant smile despite the disease that limited her movements, Dorothy felt her legs give way. She slowly slid to the floor, embracing that image, her last point of light now obscured by clouds of uncertainty and despair. "Forgive me, my girl," she whispered to the photograph, as if the child could hear her. "Grandma failed you today." It was at that moment, in the depths of her despair, that the telephone rang, a strident, alarming sound that cut through the silence of her pain. With difficulty, Dorothy got up and walked to the small table where the old device rested. Her hands trembled even more now as she picked up the receiver. On the other end of the line, the formal voice of an attendant from the hospital where her granddaughter was admitted for routine tests froze what little blood still ran in her veins. "Mrs. Dorothy, we need you to come immediately. There has been a complication with your granddaughter." "I'll be there in an hour," Dorothy responded to the hospital nurse, her trembling voice contrasting with the determination in her eyes. The news about the complication in Sarah's tests was the final blow on that disastrous day. First, the humiliating dismissal, now her granddaughter's hospitalization. Hanging up the phone, she rose from the floor with difficulty, put the girl's photo in her pocket and hurried out, ignoring the fatigue that weighed on her bones. Time passed since that terrible day, 7 days that completely transformed Dorothy's life. Sarah had been discharged after 3 days of hospitalization, with an even longer list of medications and strict medical recommendations. Dorothy's modest retirement barely covered both their basic needs, let alone the specialized treatment that Sarah's rare condition required. The morning sun illuminated the small kitchen table where bills accumulated, electricity with final notice in red, hospital invoice with impossible figures, receipts for half-purchased medications, and most alarming of all, 3 notifications of late rent. Her wrinkled hands trembled as she tried, for the 10th time that week, to make calculations that never added up. "How could I be so careless not to save more money for emergencies?" she murmured to herself, pressing her aching temples. "All those years of work, and now I barely have enough to feed my granddaughter for another week." Her granddaughter, Sarah, a 10-year-old girl with a smile that illuminated Dorothy's world even on the darkest days, slept in the small room next door. The visit to the hospital the previous week had turned into an emergency admission, fortunately now resolved, but the doctor had been emphatic there could be no interruption in the treatment. The medications needed to be administered daily without fail. Dorothy got up, walked to the bedroom door, and observed the girl sleeping, breathing peacefully, oblivious to the worries consuming her grandmother. The rare disease affecting her movements had stabilized with the expensive treatment, but any interruption could mean a serious relapse. Dorothy closed her eyes, feeling the weight of her responsibility like a mountain on her shoulders. "I'll find a way, my little one," she whispered to the sleeping girl, her voice choked with emotion. Your grandmother has never given up before and won't give up now. I promise." With renewed determination, Dorothy put on her best clothes, a simple outfit but well pressed and clean, and prepared for another day of job hunting. She had visited all the nearby businesses, left her name at stores, restaurants, even offered to work as a cleaner in homes. That morning's newspaper, which she had borrowed from a neighbor, was open to the classifieds section with some advertisements circled in red pen. Her last hope was a position for a coffee attendant at a law firm downtown. Before leaving, she checked Sarah's medications. Only enough doses remained for 2 more days. The cruel reality was there, counted in small, colorful pills that kept her granddaughter functioning normally. "God, please help me today," she prayed softly, arranging her gray hair in an impeccable bun. "It's not for me, it's for my girl. She doesn't deserve to suffer for a mistake I made." The journey to the law firm was long and tiring. Dorothy saved every penny, choosing to walk instead of taking the bus when the distance allowed. Her 65-year-old body protested with pains in her knees, but her determination never wavered. She arrived at the commercial building 20 minutes early for the interview, took a deep breath and held her head high, as Harold always said was important. "Dignity, Dorothy, is something nobody can take from you unless you allow it." The receptionist, a young woman of no more than 20, looked at her with an expression that mixed pity and discomfort when she introduced herself. Dorothy knew what that look meant. She had seen it 6 times that week. "May I help you, ma'am?" asked the receptionist, while typing something on the computer without really looking at Dorothy. "I'm here for the coffee attendant position interview. I have an appointment scheduled for 10 o'clock. "My name is Dorothy," she replied, keeping her voice firm, despite the nervousness she felt. The office was elegant, although much smaller than the company where she had worked for 30 years. The interview was brief, almost superficial. The administrative manager asked protocol questions about her experience, nodding distractedly while she detailed her years of dedicated service. Dorothy could note the exact moment when he lost interest. It was when she mentioned her age. The cordial smile transformed into a politely distant expression. Before even finishing the interview, she already knew what the outcome would be. The final words came wrapped in an artificial kindness that only made the rejection more painful. "Your experience is impressive, Dorothy. I have no doubt that you are extremely competent," said the manager, standing up and extending his hand to prematurely end the interview. "But I believe we are looking for someone with a slightly different profile for the position." "You mean someone younger, don't you?" Dorothy couldn't contain the question, her tone revealing the accumulated frustration of a week of identical rejections. "I have 30 years of experience, never missed a day, know all the secrets to good service, but none of that matters because I have wrinkles on my face." The manager looked embarrassed for a moment, but quickly recovered his professional posture. The embarrassment lasted only an instant, replaced by the polite expression that people in positions of power use when they need to say no without seeming cruel. Dorothy already knew that expression. It was the same one she saw on the executives' faces when Michael humiliated her in front of everyone. The momentary silence in the office spoke louder than any verbal response could. "We will contact you if there is any position suitable for your profile. We appreciate your interest in our company," he finally replied, his voice laden with false cordiality. "The receptionist will escort you to the exit." The way back home was even more difficult than the journey there. Each step felt heavy as lead, each breath seemed insufficient for her tired lungs. Dorothy had lost count of the rejections. 7, 8. She had lost track of how many times she had heard, "We need someone younger," or "We're looking for a different profile," or even, "We'll keep your resume in our database." Gentle euphemisms to say that her time had passed, that her experienced hands were no longer welcome in the job market. The midday sun punished the streets, making the short journey to the bus stop seem like an endless crossing. An elderly lady like her, under that heat, walking with her head down, was just another anonymous figure in the big city, invisible to the hurried eyes of passers-by. 30 years of work and this is how it ends, she thought, while waiting for the bus that would take her back to her neighborhood. Not even a chance to prove my worth. Just one look at my wrinkles, and I'm already discarded. When she finally reached her street, Dorothy spotted a man standing in front of her house. tall, formally dressed with a briefcase in hand. Her heart immediately raced. She knew that type of figure, had already seen neighbors receive similar visits. She quickened her pace, ignoring the pain in her knees, fearing what that presence meant. As she approached, she confirmed her fears. A court officer with a serious expression and documents in hand. Sarah, who was playing in the small front garden, ran to hug her grandmother, oblivious to the gravity of the situation. "Mrs. Dorothy?" asked the man, consulting the papers in his briefcase. "I have an eviction order here. You are 3 months behind on rent. The landlord grants you a 5-day period to vacate the property." "5 days? But that's impossible. I've always paid on time, only in these last few months." Dorothy tried to explain, her voice failing as she held the papers with trembling hands. "I recently lost my job. I'm looking for another one. Please, I need more time." The officer maintained a neutral expression, avoiding the elderly woman's pleading look. It was just another day of work for him, just another eviction among dozens he executed monthly. For Dorothy, however, that moment marked the complete collapse of her life. Without a job, without a home, with a sick child to care for, options were rapidly running out, like water slipping through fingers. After delivering the official documents and fulfilling his role, the man left, leaving behind a petrified Dorothy on the sidewalk, holding the papers that formalized her misfortune. "Grandma, why are you crying?" asked Sarah, pulling her sleeve, her big brown eyes full of childish concern. "Who was that man? Did he make you sad?" "It's nothing, my dear, just some papers for Grandma to resolve," replied Dorothy, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Let's go inside. I'll prepare something for us to eat." Inside the house, while Sarah drew at the kitchen table, Dorothy began to gather their belongings, methodically organizing what they could take with them and what they would have to leave behind. Each object carried memories, each photograph told a story. 30 years in that simple house conquered with so much sacrifice, all of Sarah's birthdays celebrated there, all the small victories against the disease celebrated within those walls. Now, everything would be reduced to what they could carry in a few suitcases. While separating clothes and important documents, she tried to maintain composure for Sarah, but inside a growing desperation threatened to consume her. "Where will we go, my God? How will I maintain her treatment?" she whispered to herself, silent tears wetting the clothes she carefully folded. "Who will take in an old woman with a sick child?" It was while emptying an old drawer that Dorothy found something she had completely forgotten, a photograph yellowed by time, protected by a simple wooden frame. It was from the company's inauguration 30 years ago. There she was, much younger, beside Harold, who smiled proudly in front of the newly constructed building. He had his arm over her shoulder, in a gesture that demonstrated the respect and friendship that always marked their relationship. It wasn't just employer and employee, it was a partnership of mutual trust. Dorothy ran her fingers over the image, remembering that day as if it were yesterday. Harold had given an emotional speech about how a company was built by people, not by walls or machines. She turned the photo over, and to her surprise found something handwritten on the back, a phone number, followed by the words, "For emergencies, I'll always be here. Harold." "How could I forget this?" she murmured, examining the faded but still legible numbers. "He gave me this personal number years ago, said it was for truly serious cases." Dorothy held the photograph against her chest, feeling torn. She knew about Harold's serious health condition. His heart problem had taken him away from running the company. Calling now during his recovery seemed selfish. On the other hand, she was truly desperate, and he had always told her she could count on him under any circumstance. With trembling hands, she reached for the phone on the small table in the living room. She hesitated, her finger hovering over the buttons, the conflict evident on her wrinkled face. She thought of Sarah, of the medications that would run out in 2 days, of the eviction notice, of doors closed in her face because of her age. "Forgive me, Harold," she said softly, beginning to dial the numbers. "I have no one else to turn to." Each ring of the telephone sounded like an eternity. Dorothy closed her eyes, holding the yellowed photograph as if it were a protective talisman. After 4 rings, someone answered. It wasn't Harold's familiar voice, but rather a woman, probably a nurse. Dorothy took a deep breath, gathering courage to speak. to explain her desperate situation, to beg for help without seeming to be taking advantage of her former boss's kindness. "Good afternoon. I would like to speak with Mr. Harold, please," she said, her voice firmer than she expected. "Tell him it's Dorothy, who worked at his company for 30 years. I wouldn't call if it weren't extremely important." In the hospital, Harold's luxurious room was silent, except for the constant beeping of the cardiac monitors. The nurse, surprised by the call on that personal number that rarely rang, looked at the motionless patient in bed. Harold was conscious but weakened, connected to tubes and devices that monitored every aspect of his fragile condition. The recovery from his heart problem was slow, more difficult than the doctors had initially predicted. When the nurse mentioned Dorothy's name, something changed in Harold's expression. A spark of recognition crossed his tired eyes. "Sir, it's someone named Dorothy. She seems desperate," the nurse informed, bringing the phone closer to him hesitantly. "Should I tell her you can't take the call?" Harold's eyes widened slightly upon hearing his faithful employee's name. He made a weak gesture with his hand, asking for the phone. The moment the nurse handed it to him, the cardiac monitors began to show changes in his heartbeat, a sudden increase in frequency that made the machine emit an audible alert. The concern for Dorothy, the person who had accompanied his entire business journey, who knew every detail of his routine, every preference, every habit, was evident in his immediate physical reaction. "Dorothy," he murmured into the phone, his voice weak but determined while the heart monitor recorded increasingly accelerated beats. "What happened? Tell me everything." The hospital room where Harold was recovering contrasted drastically with the simplicity of Dorothy's home. Walls in light tones adorned with discreet paintings, polished marble floors, state-of-the-art medical equipment, and a panoramic view of the city through large windows composed the environment reserved for the wealthiest patients. On the adjustable bed, Harold held the phone with slightly trembling hands, his fingers marked by intravenous tubes. The cardiac monitors recorded the acceleration in his heartbeat as he listened with growing attention to Dorothy's desperate account on the other end of the line. Each of her words seemed to physically affect him, making his face pale even more under the fluorescent light. The nurse observed attentively, ready to intervene if vital parameters exceeded safe limits. "My son did this? Michael fired you after 30 years of loyal service?" Harold asked, his voice weak but laden with indignation. "Dorothy, listen to me carefully. What happened is unforgivable and goes against everything I built in that company. I will resolve this immediately." While Dorothy continued her account of the eviction notice and the critical situation of her granddaughter, Harold's countenance gradually transformed. The fragility of the convalescent patient gave way to the determination of the businessman who had built an empire with hard work and unwavering values. With a firm gesture, he interrupted the nurse who was trying to convince him to end the call, arguing about his delicate condition. His eyes sparkled with renewed energy, as if indignation were fuel enough to overcome the physical limitations imposed by the disease. He adjusted himself in bed with visible effort, ignoring the pain that the movement caused in his recently operated chest. "Don't interrupt me," he said to the nurse with surprising authority. "Dorothy, don't worry about the eviction or your granddaughter's medicine. I will send my personal lawyer to your home immediately. He will bring enough money to resolve your immediate needs and precise instructions about what we will do next. Mr. Harold, please don't get agitated." "The doctor was very clear about the need for absolute rest after surgery," insisted the nurse, checking the monitors with growing concern. "If you continue like this, I'll have to call the doctor on duty." After ending the call with firm promises of help, Harold requested his cell phone, kept in a nearby drawer since his hospitalization. The nurse hesitated, citing hospital protocols and medical recommendations against stress and activities that could compromise his recovery. The businessman, however, was not willing to negotiate. With a determination that surprised even the experienced professional, he removed one of the cardiac sensors from his arm, triggering the monitor's alarm. The calculated gesture immediately brought two other nurses to the room, creating exactly the distraction he needed to reach the cell phone without interference. "I am perfectly lucid and in control of my mental faculties," he declared firmly to the professionals trying to restrain him. "I need to make 2 urgent calls that cannot wait. After that, I promise to cooperate with any necessary procedure, but now give me 10 minutes of privacy. Mr. Harold, Dr. Castro was very specific. Any cardiac alteration can compromise all the work of the surgery. Please understand that we are just following protocols for your own good, argued the head nurse, trying a firmer approach. The first call was to his trusted lawyer, who had been serving Harold for more than 20 years. The conversation was brief and objective. Precise instructions were transmitted. Visit Dorothy immediately, provide emergency financial support, resolve the eviction issue with the property owner, and most importantly, prepare specific documents to be taken to the company the following morning. The lawyer, accustomed to the efficiency required by his client, did not question the unusual orders, only took detailed notes and ensured that everything would be executed as requested. While speaking, Harold observed through the window the movement of the city below, feeling a renewed sense of purpose and responsibility that had always guided his decisions as a business leader and as a human being. "Benjamin, I want you to understand the gravity of the situation," Harold explained, his voice gaining strength with each word. "My son is destroying everything I built, not just physical structures or numbers in financial statements, but the fundamental values I have always stood for. Our company was not built on exploitation or disrespect, and I will not allow it to transform into that in my absence. I understand perfectly, sir. I will personally take care of every detail. Mrs. Dorothy will receive all necessary support, and the documents will be ready for tomorrow as requested. Should I inform your son about these measures?" asked the lawyer, anticipating possible complications. The second call was to his personal doctor, demanding immediate hospital discharge, against all recommendations from the team. The discussion was heated, with the doctor listing the risks of interrupting treatment and supervised recovery. Harold, however, was unyielding. It wasn't about stubbornness or impulsivity. It was a matter of principles, of correcting an injustice committed in his name, using a company that carried his values. After almost 20 minutes of argumentation, an agreement was established. He would be discharged under his own responsibility, with the condition of keeping a private nurse 24 hours and returning immediately to the hospital if he presented any alarming symptoms. "Doctor, I understand your concern and I appreciate it. But there are different types of healing, and at this moment my soul needs repair as much as my body," argued Harold, with a serenity that contrasted with the gravity of his decision. "If I don't correct what is happening, no medical treatment will bring peace to my heart. As your doctor for 15 years, I know it's useless to argue when you make a decision based on your principles. I will sign the discharge under responsibility, but I am registering my formal protest, and I demand that you maintain continuous cardiac monitoring and the nurse I will designate," replied the doctor, acknowledging the lost battle. Meanwhile, at the company headquarters, Michael was conducting a meeting with key executives, celebrating the results of the first measures of modernization and efficiency implemented in just 1 week. Impressive graphics on the screen showed reductions in operational costs, mainly due to the personnel cuts he had made. Employees who had been with the company for decades were replaced by young recent graduates with significantly lower salaries. Processes were restructured, aiming for maximum productivity, often at the expense of the well-being of the remaining employees. The meeting room, previously a space for collaborative discussions under Harold's management, had transformed into a stage for authoritarian monologues by his son. "Gentlemen, these numbers are just the beginning," declared Michael, with a satisfied smile while pointing to the projections on the screen. "My father built a solid business, but was too compassionate. Today's market doesn't forgive sentimentality or attachments to unproductive employees. With all due respect, Mr. Michael, some of the layoffs have generated a negative impact on the organizational climate. People like Dorothy were more than employees, they were part of the company culture," dared to comment a veteran director, carefully choosing his words. The vibration of his cell phone interrupted the acid response that Michael was preparing. The hospital name on the screen momentarily made his heart race. Since taking control of the company, he had visited his father only twice a week, always with brief conversations focused on performance reports that he knew Harold would not fully approve. The call, however, didn't bring news about his father's health condition. but rather the alarming information that he had left the hospital against medical recommendations, signing a liability waiver and departing in a private ambulance to an unknown destination. What do you mean, disappeared? You are a first-rate hospital, not a neighborhood clinic. How do you allow a post-cardiac surgery patient to simply walk out the doors without proper supervision? He vociferated on the phone, his face visibly reddening before the executives who watched the scene with evident discomfort. Mr. Michael, your father is legally capable and made this decision consciously. We signed the necessary documents and advised him of the risks. The nurse assigned to accompany him tried to inform where they were going, but he expressly prohibited that information from being shared, even with family members, the hospital administrator patiently explained. Panic took over Michael. He abruptly abandoned the meeting, leaving the executives confused and apprehensive. His father, still recovering from delicate heart surgery, had simply disappeared. Terrifying possibilities multiplied in his mind as he drove frantically around the city, visiting places where he imagined his father might have gone. Despite the complicated relationship they had developed in recent years, with diametrically opposed business visions, Michael genuinely worried about his father's health, or perhaps, on a deeper level that he was reluctant to admit, he feared losing control of the company if something happened to Harold before the transition was legally consolidated. "Dad, what are you doing? Why leave like this, risking your life?" he muttered, while repeatedly checking his cell phone, waiting for news. "Whatever you've discovered about my changes to the company, we can discuss rationally, without drama. Sir, we've checked all the listed addresses, and there's no sign of your father at any of them," his assistant informed him by phone, after hours of fruitless searching. The ambulance driver confirms he dropped him off at an address downtown, but was instructed not to reveal the specific location. At that same moment, at the other end of the city, in Dorothy's humble residence, the doorbell rang. Still dazed by the conversation with Harold and incredulous about the promise of help, she opened the door with hesitation. A middle-aged man, impeccably dressed in a formal suit, carrying a genuine leather briefcase, introduced himself as Benjamin, Harold's personal lawyer. Without many initial explanations, he entered the small living room and observed the partially packed suitcases and belongings organized for the imminent eviction. His professional expressions softened when he noticed the pale girl sitting on the sofa, clearly debilitated, leafing through a worn-out book. "Mrs. Dorothy, Mr. Harold sent me to resolve your situation immediately," he said, opening the briefcase and removing envelopes and documents. "First, here is an amount to cover your emergency needs, medicines, food, and any medical expenses for your granddaughter." "Is this real? Did Harold really send help so quickly?" asked Dorothy, holding the envelope with trembling hands, almost fearing that everything was just a dream born of her despair. "I haven't spoken to him for more than a week, since his son fired me." The lawyer methodically explained the next steps, while Dorothy listened in shock. The eviction problem would be resolved immediately. Not only would the back rent be paid off, but Harold had ordered the purchase of the property and the transfer of the deed to Dorothy's name in recognition of decades of loyal service. The medications for her granddaughter would be delivered within an hour, after Benjamin personally placed the order at the specialized pharmacy that served Harold's family. However, the most surprising was yet to come. With careful formality, the lawyer removed a final envelope from his folder and handed it to Dorothy. "This is both an invitation and an instruction, Mrs. Dorothy," he explained, as she carefully opened the envelope. "Mr. Harold requests that you attend the company headquarters tomorrow, promptly at 9 o'clock in the morning. Wear your best clothes and be prepared for an important meeting. A driver will come to pick you up." "But I don't understand. Why does Harold want me to go to the company? After the way I was humiliated and fired, I don't know if I could face those people again," replied Dorothy, confused and apprehensive. "And Michael certainly won't be happy to see me there." With a slight, enigmatic smile suggesting knowledge of plans he couldn't fully reveal, Benjamin stored the signed documents in his briefcase. Before leaving, he gave Dorothy a card with his personal contacts, ensuring availability in case of any need until their meeting the following morning. At the door, he observed again the modest environment, impeccably clean and organized, despite adverse circumstances, a reflection of its residents' dignity and character. His final comment before leaving left Dorothy even more intrigued about what was to come. Mr. Harold told me to convey a final message. Prepare to return to the company, but not as before. Loyalty and dignity always find their way back, often through unexpected paths. He said you would understand the meaning tomorrow, revealed Benjamin with a brief farewell nod. Until tomorrow, Mrs. Dorothy. Rest easy tonight. How can I thank you for all this? Tell Harold his kindness has saved 2 lives today, responded Dorothy, tears of relief and gratitude shining in her tired eyes. I'll be ready tomorrow promptly. The night was long for Michael. After hours of fruitless searching, he returned to his luxurious apartment downtown, exhausted and worried. Attempts to contact his father's cell phone went straight to voicemail. No one in his close circle had any information about Harold's whereabouts. Anxiety prevented him from sleeping properly, and the first rays of sun found him already awake, preparing to go to the company earlier than usual. Something told him answers might be there. Perhaps his father, in an act of rebellion against the implemented changes, had decided to return to the office to try to regain control. The idea deeply disturbed him. He wasn't prepared for a direct confrontation with Harold about his management decisions, especially in front of employees. If he showed up at the company, I need to be there first, prepare the ground, avoid a public confrontation, he thought, while driving through the still empty streets of Dawn. Dad, why couldn't you simply trust me to modernize what you built? Why this resistance to necessary changes? Perhaps because some changes destroy much more than they build, his conscience answered, in a voice uncomfortably similar to Harold's. Upon arriving at the company, Michael immediately noticed something different in the atmosphere. The security guards at reception, normally effusive in their morning greetings, merely nodded respectfully with indefinable expressions. In the elevator, he encountered 2 department managers who abruptly interrupted their conversation when he entered, exchanging meaningful glances that didn't go unnoticed. In the corridors of the executive floor, employees moved with unusual energy for that hour, whispering among themselves and quickly dispersing when he approached. Something was definitely happening, and he apparently was the only one not informed. "Good morning, Mr. Michael," his secretary greeted with a tense smile. "There are visitors waiting in your office. They arrived about 20 minutes ago." "Visitors? I don't have any meetings scheduled for this morning. Who authorized them to enter my office without my presence?" he questioned irritably, walking with long strides toward the presidential office. "And why is everyone acting so strangely today? Your father is among the visitors, sir. He arrived accompanied by his lawyer and—" "Dorothy," replied the secretary hesitantly, carefully observing his reaction. He requested that no one inform him in advance. The impact of those words was like a physical blow. Michael stopped abruptly in the middle of the hallway, processing the information. His father had returned to the company, bringing with him precisely the employee he had humiliatingly fired on his first day as president. The coincidence was too perfect to be accidental. Clearly, Harold had discovered the incident and was preparing some kind of intervention. With his heart racing and his mind swirling between indignation and apprehension, Michael resumed his determined walk toward the office, determined to maintain control of the situation, whatever his father's intention might be. So that's why he disappeared from the hospital. To orchestrate some kind of public confrontation, he muttered to himself, nervously adjusting his tie. After everything I've done to increase this company's efficiency, to prepare it for the future. Employees clustered discreetly in the corridors, trying not to appear obvious in their curiosity about the imminent encounter. Michael could feel the gazes following him, some with evident expectation, others with poorly disguised satisfaction, especially those who had lost close colleagues in the recent layoffs. A few meters from his office door, he involuntarily slowed down, as if approaching a court where he would be judged. He took a deep breath, composed his best expression of controlled authority, and turned the doorknob. The scene he found inside the office surpassed his most surreal expectations. Sitting in his own presidential chair, behind the imposing oak desk that symbolized maximum power in the company, was Dorothy. The elderly server who a week ago was crying and begging not to be fired, now literally occupied his place, dressed in an elegant business outfit he had never seen her wear. Beside her, in a wheelchair but with an upright posture and firm gaze, was Harold, visibly physically debilitated but emanating an unwavering authority. Standing near the window, the family lawyer held a folder with documents, his professional expression masking any personal emotion about the situation. The silence that followed Michael's entrance was dense enough to be cut with a knife. "Dad? What does this mean? Everyone's been looking for you since yesterday," he finally exclaimed, deciding to attack from the angle of concern, rather than immediately confronting the strange configuration of the office. "The doctors said your departure from the hospital was extremely irresponsible." "Good morning, son. We've closed your office door for a few minutes. We have important matters to discuss before we summon the rest of the board," Harold responded, with disturbing calmness, gesturing for the lawyer to approach with the documents. "I believe we have some fundamental disagreements about what it means to lead this company." Michael remained standing by the entrance, unable to fully process the surreal scene before him. His gaze alternated between his father, the lawyer, and mainly Dorothy. Sitting in his chair with a serene dignity he would never have associated with the humble server he had fired. The implicit message in the configuration was clear and deliberately provocative. Some profound transformation had occurred, some decision had been made, and he was about to discover how his brief reign as company president was coming to an end as unexpectedly as it had begun. "What is Dorothy doing in my chair? And what documents are those?" he finally asked, his voice betraying the mixture of confusion and indignation he felt. "Dad, if this is some kind of lesson or symbolic demonstration, I think you're going too far." "No, son, this is not a symbol or a temporary lesson," Harold replied, his penetrating gaze fixed on Michael. "This is a course correction. Starting today, Dorothy officially assumes the Directorship of Human Resources and Employee Welfare, a new department with veto power over any decision affecting our staff. And you, my son, will learn the value of each function in this company, beginning with serving coffee at the next meetings." The tension in Michael's office was palpable. The charged atmosphere was briefly interrupted when the secretary gently knocked on the half-open door, announcing that the directors were waiting in the main meeting room as requested by Harold. The lawyer gathered the documents scattered on the desk and, with a discreet nod, indicated it was time to proceed. Harold adjusted himself in the wheelchair, while Dorothy rose with dignity from the presidential chair she had momentarily occupied, a symbolism that escaped no one in that room. It was time for the final confrontation, no longer in a private setting, but in front of all company leadership. "Let's go, son," said Harold, his firm voice contrasting with the apparent fragility of his body. "There are important decisions to be communicated, and I prefer to do it just once in front of everyone." "Father, please, think carefully about what you're doing," Michael implored, his tone alternating between frustration and desperation. "Any drastic change now could destabilize the company you built yourself. I was just trying to modernize it, make it more efficient, more competitive." The path to the meeting room, normally covered in seconds, seemed like an eternity. Employees stopped their activities to observe the strange procession. Harold in his wheelchair, pushed by his lawyer, Dorothy, the former coffee lady now formally dressed, walking with serene dignity, and Michael, visibly disturbed, closing the improvised procession. The corridors never seemed so long, nor the gazes so intense. Whispers followed their passage like waves, spreading through departments with impressive speed. "Is that her? Miss Dorothy, who was fired last week? What's happening?" asked a young assistant to his supervisor, not bothering to lower his voice. "Old Harold is back, and apparently he didn't like his son's changes." "This is going to be interesting," replied the supervisor, not hiding a smile of satisfaction. The company's main meeting room had always been the heart of major decisions. With its imposing oval table in dark wood, ergonomic leather chairs and panoramic view of the city through floor-to-ceiling windows, the environment had witnessed 3 decades of growth and transformation under Harold's leadership. On the walls, historical photographs documented important moments: the inauguration of the first office, the acquisition of competing companies, awards for social responsibility, charity events. In each image, the same spirit shone through: business success founded on human values. When the double doors opened, the 12 directors were already positioned in their usual places. The immediate silence that established itself was almost deafening. Expressions of surprise, confusion, and on some older faces, poorly disguised satisfaction, revealed the whirlwind of emotions that unexpected entrance provoked. Harold was positioned at the head of the table, with Dorothy to his right and the lawyer to his left. Michael, hesitant, remained standing, as if he didn't exactly know where he should sit in this new power configuration. "Good morning, everyone," Harold began, his voice surprisingly strong for someone who had recently undergone heart surgery. "I know my presence here is unexpected, considering my health condition. However, there are situations that cannot wait, decisions that need to be made immediately, when the fundamental values of this company are violated. Mr. Harold, it's a pleasure to see you recovered. We were all very concerned," expressed a veteran director, breaking the initial ice. "May I ask what brings Miss Dorothy to this meeting? I believe there was an incident last week." Harold's gaze slowly traveled over each face present, as if individually assessing the character of each person at the table. His eyes lingered a bit longer on the older directors, those who had witnessed the company's growth since the early years. When he finally spoke, his voice carried not just authority but a deep disappointment that seemed to reach each of those present. "An incident, as you kindly defined it, Jennifer? No. What occurred was a complete violation of everything this company stands for. Dorothy, who faithfully served this company for 30 years, was humiliated and fired for accidentally spilling coffee during her service," he declared, pausing to let the weight of the words settle. "I ask you, directors and leaders whom I personally chose, who in this room protested against this injustice? Who defended a loyal employee who dedicated half of her life to this company?" The embarrassed silence that followed was answer enough. Heads lowered, gazes diverted to documents suddenly extremely interesting. The uncomfortable truth hung in the air. Nobody had spoken up, all fearing for their own positions under the new administration. Harold nodded slowly, as if confirming a painful suspicion. "As I thought. Fear silences even the most just among us," he continued, his voice now softer but no less impactful. "What many of you don't know is that Dorothy wasn't just a coffee lady. For 3 decades, she was my eyes and ears in this company. In her seemingly humble position, she identified and reported directly to me numerous cases of dishonesty, harassment, and misconduct that could have cost the company millions." Expressions of genuine surprise appeared on almost all faces. Michael, still standing near the door, seemed the most impacted by the revelation. Dorothy kept her gaze fixed on her hands resting on the table, the humility that had always characterized her still present, despite the extraordinary circumstance in which she found herself. "Allow me to illustrate with just one example," Harold continued, gesturing for his lawyer to open a specific folder. "In 2018, Dorothy noticed suspicious behavior from a high-level executive during preparations for an important merger. Her observations, seemingly insignificant to anyone else, phone calls at unusual hours, documents quickly hidden when someone approached, led to a discreet investigation that revealed insider information being leaked to competitors. The timely intervention prevented estimated losses in the tens of millions." "But that's unbelievable," muttered one of the younger directors, looking at Dorothy with new respect. "All this time we thought she was just a coffee lady, an elderly woman who served coffee," Harold completed with a sad smile. "And isn't exactly this type of thinking that demonstrates the fundamental problem? You've grown accustomed to seeing only functions, not people, positions, not stories, costs, not values." The lawyer distributed documents to those present, keeping a main copy which he ceremoniously placed in front of Harold. The businessman breathed deeply before continuing, visibly conserving energy for what would come next. Michael finally took a seat at the table, far from the head, his expression oscillating between indignation and growing understanding. "The document in your hands is a modification to the company's bylaws, duly registered last night. I've created a new directorship, Human Resources and Employee Well-being, with veto power over any decision affecting our employees, regardless of hierarchical level," announced Harold, his voice growing in firmness. "And I appoint, from today, Dorothy as director of this department." The room exploded in surprised murmurs and restrained exclamations. Michael rose abruptly, his face red with indignation, unable to contain himself in the face of what he considered an affront to his newly acquired authority. "This is completely absurd. A coffee lady without higher education, without managerial experience, taking over a directorship. He protested vehemently, pounding his hand on the table. Father, this is an emotional decision that compromises the entire credibility of the company. Silence, Harold's voice thundered, surprisingly powerful for someone in his physical condition. Dorothy possesses what no diploma can teach: integrity, loyalty, and a profound understanding of what truly sustains a company. Its people. She knows every employee by name, their stories, their difficulties, their aspirations. How many of you with your expensive MBAs and specializations can say the same? The silence that followed was more eloquent than any response. Harold gestured to Dorothy, encouraging her to speak. With visible initial nervousness but growing confidence, she straightened in her chair and addressed those present with a dignity that commanded immediate attention. I never sought positions of prominence or power, she began, her voice soft but firm. For 30 years I've watched this company grow, seen people arrive full of dreams and others leave, some fulfilled, others disillusioned. I've learned that an organization is not made of walls or machines, but of hearts beating in synchrony for a common purpose. I accept this responsibility not as a privilege, but as a commitment to ensure that every person who works here is treated with the respect and dignity they deserve. The simplicity and sincerity of her words seemed to touch even the most skeptical in the room. Harold watched with evident pride, while Michael remained in stunned silence, unable to contest the authenticity of that impromptu but deeply felt speech. As for you, son, Harold turned to Michael, his tone now combining paternal firmness with business authority. You now face a crucial choice. You can accept this new reality, learn from it and grow as a leader and as a human being, starting by understanding the value of each role in this company, including serving coffee at the next meetings, as Dorothy did for decades with dignity and excellence. Or you can refuse to accept, and in that case I will be forced to disinherit you and permanently remove you from any position in the company I built. The ultimatum hung heavily in the air. The directors observed the scene with the tension of those witnessing the climax of both a family and business drama simultaneously. Michael, for the first time since he had assumed the presidency, seemed genuinely at a loss for words, confronted not only with the possible loss of his position and inheritance, but with a profound reassessment of his values and actions. The choice is yours, son, but know that this is not a negotiation, Harold concluded, his tone softening slightly. It's an opportunity for redemption. After moments that seemed like an eternity, Michael slowly unbuttoned his impeccable jacket, carefully rolled up the sleeves of his linen shirt, and, to the astonishment of everyone present, headed to the small pantry adjacent to the meeting room. He returned minutes later carrying a tray with coffee cups, which he began to serve methodically, starting with Dorothy, in a symbolic gesture that went unnoticed by no one. I believe Director Dorothy prefers coffee with a touch of cinnamon, if I'm not mistaken, he said with forced humility, but one that represented the beginning of something new. I apologize if it's not up to the standard of service you've provided for so many years. It's perfect, Michael, Dorothy replied with an understanding smile. And remember, it's not about the coffee. It never was. It's about the respect with which we serve one another, regardless of the position we hold. Harold watched the scene with evident emotion, his face reflecting both relief and hope. With a gesture, he asked for everyone's attention again for what would be the closing of that extraordinary meeting. Before we conclude, I would like our new director to share her first official proposal, he announced, making an encouraging gesture toward Dorothy. With growing confidence, Dorothy presented her vision for a comprehensive healthcare program for employees and their families. She explained how her own experience with her granddaughter's illness and the resulting financial difficulties had made her deeply understand the importance of this support. The plan, surprisingly well structured for someone without formal management training, included partnerships with hospitals, discounts on medications, and personalized follow-up for special cases. No employee of this company should have to choose between working or properly caring for their family's health, she concluded, with the wisdom of someone who personally experienced this dilemma. This is not just a matter of benefits. It's about valuing what really matters, the well-being of the people who make this company function every day. The approval was unanimous, including verbal support from Michael, who seemed to begin to see a business perspective he had never considered before. Months later, Dorothy was organizing documents in her new office, a simple but elegant space with a functional desk and a small area to receive employees who wanted to share concerns or suggestions. Photos of her granddaughter, now healthy thanks to the proper treatment provided by the company's new health program, adorned a corner of the desk. A knock on the door interrupted her concentration. "Hey, excuse me, Dorothy, I brought coffee," announced Michael, entering with a tray. It was no longer a gesture of forced humiliation, but a ritual that had been established between them, a daily moment of sincere conversation and mutual learning. "Thank you, Michael. Please sit down," she invited, pushing the papers aside. "How was your visit to the production sector today?" Revealing. I had never really talked to the machine operators before. "Their ideas for improving efficiency are surprisingly practical," he replied, with the humility of someone discovering a new world within his own company. "One of them, Paul, has worked here for 20 years and suggested a modification to the inventory organization system that could save hours per week." Amazing how we never paid attention to these voices. It's because some voices can only be heard when we truly make ourselves available to listen, commented Dorothy, arranging some papers on her desk. "Your father was always an excellent listener. I remember how he would spend hours on the factory floor, talking to everyone, writing down suggestions in his small blue notebook." "Seos, the blue notebook. I remembered it from when I was a child. I thought they were just business notes," said Michael, with the surprise of someone discovering a new facet of someone they thought they knew completely. "By the way, how is your granddaughter? Is the treatment progressing well?" "Wonderfully. The doctors say she can reduce her medication next month," Dorothy replied, with the radiant smile of a proud grandmother. She took a recent photograph of the girl and showed it to Michael. "Yesterday, she managed to run in the park for almost an hour without getting tired. Before the new treatment, this would have been impossible. That's really incredible. And to think that our healthcare assistance program has already benefited more than 50 families in just 3 months," commented Michael, genuinely moved. "The productivity reports also show improvements. People work better when they're not worried about family health problems. You know, Michael, your father always said that a truly successful company is one where everyone grows together, not just in financial results, but as human beings. He'll be happy when he hears about the community lunch you organized to celebrate the month's birthdays." Michael nodded thoughtfully, observing through the window the movement of the company that he now saw with completely different eyes. At the corner of the parking lot, he could see his father, now recovered and walking with the support of a cane, chatting animatedly with a group of new employees. The lesson had been hard but effective. In his quest for efficiency and modernization, he had almost destroyed the true foundation of that business, the spirit of community and mutual respect, carefully cultivated by his father over decades. "Dorothy, I never imagined saying this, but thank you," he finally said with genuine sincerity in his voice, "for not holding grudges, for teaching me what no business school could teach. My MBA cost a fortune, but the real education happened here, when I lost everything I thought was important and discovered what really matters." "Life has interesting ways of putting us exactly where we need to be," she replied, with the serene wisdom of those who have lived enough to understand the cycles of falls and redemptions, even if sometimes the path seems to begin with a spilled cup of coffee. Did you enjoy Dorothy and Harold's story? Then subscribe to the channel, leave your like and comment where you're watching from. Oh, and there's another story waiting for you here on screen. Click there and I'll be waiting for you.